The cowgirl arrived carrying another woman's wedding dress and a bullet meant for the rancher waiting to receive it. She saw the rifleman in the hotel window one heartbeat before he fired. She struck the rancher behind the knees, sent them both crashing behind a baggage cart, and answered the second shot with a revolver drawn from beneath her traveling coat. When the smoke cleared, the mail-order bride was gone, the assassin had escaped, and half the town was staring at the cowgirl lying across a man she had never met. She pushed herself upright and handed him the unopened farewell letter. "You bought the wrong bride," she said. The rancher touched the bullet hole in his hat, looked at the woman who had just saved his life, and began to smile. Then he held out his hand. "Ma'am, I believe the wrong bride is the only reason I'm still alive." The woman Nathaniel Reed had agreed to marry arrived at Dry Creek Station on April 17, 1884. She simply refused to leave the train. Nathaniel did not know that yet. He stood beneath the station clock in his best black coat, holding 6 yellow prairie roses that had cost him more embarrassment to gather than money to buy. Half the town had found reasons to be nearby. Dry Creek had not received a mail-order bride in 3 years, and private misery was the closest thing the settlement had to public theater. When the train finally screamed to a stop, Nathaniel straightened. Steam rolled across the platform. Doors opened. Passengers descended. No bride appeared. Instead, a woman jumped from the livestock car. She wore a divided riding skirt stained with trail dust, high boots, and a dark coat that had been repaired often enough to suggest she trusted good cloth more than fashion. A revolver rested beneath her right hand. Over her left shoulder hung a white wedding dress wrapped in linen, one sleeve trailing dangerously close to the soot-blackened boards. Nathaniel looked at the dress, then at the woman. She was not Eleanor Bell. He had exchanged 14 letters with Eleanor and received one photograph. The photograph showed a delicate woman with pale hair and hands that had clearly never pulled a calf in the rain. This stranger was dark-haired, sun-browned, and built with the balanced stillness of someone who had spent more years in a saddle than in a parlor. She walked directly toward him. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes. My name is Mara Hollis. Miss Bell asked me to give you this." She held out a sealed letter. Nathaniel stared at it but did not take it. "Where is she?" "Still aboard." The whistle sounded. "She won't come down," Mara said. "I tried reason, kindness, and language that would make a preacher reconsider my upbringing. None of it worked." The train began to move. Nathaniel looked past her. Through the window of the second passenger carriage, a pale face vanished behind a curtain. Mara offered him the letter again. "You bought the wrong bride," she said. A few men near the freight office laughed. Nathaniel's hand tightened around the flowers, but the anger Mara expected never reached his face. Instead, he looked at the woman who had crossed a moving train to deliver another person's cowardice, and something in his expression softened. He smiled and held out his hand. "Nathaniel Reed," he said. "Since you already know the worst thing about my morning, we might as well be properly introduced." Mara had just begun to raise her hand when she saw sunlight flash in the upstairs window of the Copper Bell Hotel. Not glass. Metal. A rifle barrel. "Down!" She struck Nathaniel behind the knees. The first shot tore through the crown of his hat. Nathaniel hit the platform hard. The roses scattered beneath a baggage cart. Mara landed across his chest, drew her revolver, and fired once toward the hotel window. Glass exploded outward. People screamed and fled. The station master disappeared behind a stack of milk cans with an agility no one had previously suspected he possessed. A second shot buried itself in the post where Nathaniel's head had been. Mara fired again. The shadow vanished from the hotel window. For several seconds, the only sound was the departing train gathering speed as it carried Nathaniel's promised bride safely away from the man someone had just tried to murder. Mara pushed herself upright. "Are you hit?" "No." She picked up his hat and put one finger through the new hole in its crown. "Close." Nathaniel sat up, breathing hard. "You do this often?" "Deliver rejected wedding dresses or shoot at hotel windows?" "Either." "No." "That is reassuring." Sheriff Amos Pike and 2 deputies rushed across the street toward the hotel. Nathaniel rose slowly. His coat was covered in dust, one sleeve had torn at the elbow, and the flowers he had gathered before sunrise had been crushed beneath half the population of Dry Creek. He looked at Mara again. She was still holding Eleanor Bell's letter. The bullet had passed through one corner of the envelope. Nathaniel took it carefully and broke the seal. The message contained only 4 lines. He read them once, then again. Mara watched the humor leave his face. "What does it say?" Nathaniel handed her the letter. Mara read aloud. "Mr. Reed, forgive me. A man in a gray coat paid my return fare and warned that if I stepped onto the platform, neither of us would survive until May. He knew about your father's will, he knew why you needed a wife, and he said the next bullet would not miss." Mara lowered the paper. Across the street, the sheriff appeared in the shattered hotel window and shook his head. The gunman was gone. Nathaniel looked at the bullet hole in his hat, the abandoned wedding dress, and the cowgirl who had saved his life less than a minute after telling him she was the wrong bride. Then he held out his hand again. This time, Mara took it. Sheriff Pike returned from the Copper Bell 20 minutes later, carrying an empty rifle case and a temper bad enough to sour milk. The shooter had rented the room under the name Daniel Vale, paid cash, entered through the front door wearing a gray traveling coat, and escaped down the rear stairs before Pike reached the hotel. The room contained no luggage, no personal papers, and nothing that could identify him except a single brass cartridge beneath the window. Mara examined it before the sheriff could object. "Hand-loaded," she said, rolling it between her fingers. "Too much powder." Whoever fired it wanted distance more than accuracy. Nathaniel glanced at the 2 bullet holes behind them. He came close enough. Close is what men call a mistake when they're still alive to describe it. Pike gave her a measuring look. "You know rifles? I know men who shoot from hiding. They usually trust the weapon more than their nerve." The sheriff sent his deputies to search the alleys and livery barns, though all 3 of them understood the gunman had planned his escape as carefully as the attack. Nathaniel retrieved the abandoned wedding dress and folded the trailing sleeve over his arm. It was a strangely gentle gesture for a man who had nearly died beside it. "The next eastbound passenger train comes through Friday," he told Mara. "Until then, I'll pay for a room at the hotel. After what happened, you shouldn't be traveling alone." Mara's expression hardened. "I can pay for my own room." "I did not say you couldn't, and I don't need permission to leave." "I did not say that either." Nathaniel picked up his ruined hat. "You saved my life. I'm offering 3 nights beneath a roof and enough food to replace whatever the railroad called breakfast. You may accept, refuse, or shoot another hole through my hat, though I'd prefer the first." Mara studied him. Men often claimed to respect a woman's choices when they expected gratitude to make the choice for her. Nathaniel Reed did not lean closer, lower his voice, or turn generosity into a rope. He simply waited. "1 night," she said, "then I decide." "Fair." They crossed to the hotel dining room under the eyes of a town already improving the story with every retelling. By the time they sat down, Mara had reportedly fired 6 shots, killed 2 gunmen, and agreed to marry Nathaniel before the station clock struck noon. In truth, she had fired twice, killed no one, and was considering whether leaving Dry Creek immediately would be safer than remaining beside the man everyone seemed determined to keep unmarried. Nathaniel ordered coffee and beef stew. When the waitress left, he placed Eleanor's letter between them. "You asked about my father's will," he said. "I didn't. No, but you're still sitting here. That tells me you want the truth before deciding whether to walk away." He explained that his father, Jonathan Reed, had died the previous October and left the Reed Crossing Ranch to Nathaniel under one condition. By May 1st, Nathaniel had to be married and maintaining the ranch as a family holding. If he failed, controlling interest would pass to his cousin Royce Reed, who had spent the winter negotiating with the Western Plains Railroad. The railroad did not care about cattle. It wanted the spring-fed valley cutting through Reed land, the only dependable water for 30 miles along its proposed route. "Royce sells the water rights, the railroad fences the valley, and my herd loses the summer range," Nathaniel said. "Within 2 years, the ranch dies politely on paper." Mara looked toward the window. "And you thought a woman from Chicago would solve that?" "I thought marriage would satisfy the will." I hoped the woman might eventually forgive the reason I had advertised. That is not the same as wanting a wife. No, he said. It is wanting to keep my father's land. I won't dress one need in another's clothing. His answer was not romantic. Mara trusted it more for that reason. She reached for the wedding dress, intending to fold it properly before returning it to Eleanor somehow. When she lifted the bodice, something stiff crackled inside the lining. A narrow pocket had been sewn beneath the left seam. Mara opened it with the tip of her knife and removed a railroad freight receipt, folded twice. The document recorded a payment of $400 to Eleanor Bell, issued from the private account of R. Reed. Beneath it lay a small card bearing the name Western Plains Land Office and the signature of Cyrus Vane, the company's regional purchasing agent. Nathaniel read both in silence. Royce paid her, Mara said, or someone used his account. Either way, Eleanor knew enough to hide the receipt. She was frightened, not foolish. Nathaniel looked at the bullet hole through her letter. That makes two of us. Sheriff Pike entered before Mara could answer. Mud covered his boots, and he carried a broken leather strap marked with a familiar R brand. We found the shooter's horse abandoned behind the grain warehouse, he said. Saddle came from Reed Crossing. Nathaniel rose. That is impossible. Apparently not. One of your own horses carried the man who tried to kill you. Pike dropped the broken strap beside the railroad receipt, which means either somebody stole it without waking your hands, or the shooter has help inside your ranch. Mara looked at Nathaniel. For the first time since the station, he no longer resembled a humiliated groom or a grateful survivor. He looked like a man calculating how many people beneath his roof might want him dead. Nathaniel folded the receipt and placed it inside his coat. You should take Friday's train, he told Mara quietly. This was not your fight. Mara glanced at the wedding dress, the farewell letter pierced by a bullet, and the rifle cartridge still resting beside her coffee. It became my fight when someone fired over my shoulder, she said. And I haven't decided anything about Friday. Mara agreed to ride to Reed Crossing for one reason only. The abandoned gelding was evidence, and evidence was less likely to lie when examined where it had been raised. Nathaniel made no attempt to turn her decision into anything more. He paid the hotel bill, handed Eleanor's wedding dress to Mrs. Tully for safekeeping, and waited while Mara retrieved her dun mare from the stock pens. The ranch lay 11 miles northwest of Dry Creek, across low spring grass broken by sandstone ridges and narrow creeks swollen with snowmelt. Nathaniel rode beside her wearing the same black hat the rifle ball had pierced. You own others, Mara observed. 3. And yet you chose the one with a hole large enough to admit weather. It was the only hat in reach. You rode back into a town containing a rifleman and selected convenience over protection. Nathaniel considered this. When you say it that way, it sounds poorly reasoned. Most foolish decisions improve when described by the person who made them. Yours appears resistant. It was the first time he heard her laugh, though she tried to hide it by turning toward the hills. Reed Crossing proved larger and better managed than Mara expected. 8,600 acres spread along a spring-fed valley, with a 2-story ranch house, 3 barns, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, and corrals built from peeled lodgepole pine. The cattle were healthy, the fences straight, and the men working the branding pen moved with the unhurried efficiency of people who knew exactly where their hands belonged. Nothing about the property suggested a desperate bachelor searching for a decorative wife. Everything suggested a ranch worth murdering a man to obtain. The foreman, Gideon Harper, met them at the yard gate. He was nearly 60, broad across the shoulders, and possessed the permanent squint of a man who had spent 40 years looking into western sunlight. His relief at seeing Nathaniel alive lasted until he noticed Mara. This Miss Bell? No, Nathaniel said. This is Mara Hollis. Miss Bell remained on the train. Gideon removed his hat. I'm sorry to hear that. Someone shot at us before I had time to become properly disappointed. Gideon's face hardened. Nathaniel showed him the broken saddle strap. Sheriff found Bracken behind the grain warehouse. Saddle came from our tack room. Gideon took the leather and turned it over. Bracken was at the South Line camp yesterday morning. Cal Dorsey rode him while checking the lower fences. Where is Cal? Mara asked. Gideon looked at her before answering. In the branding pen. Then I'd like to see the horse before I see Cal. Nathaniel nodded as though the request required no explanation. Gideon noticed that too. Bracken stood in the small recovery corral behind the stable, his flanks cleaned but still marked by dried sweat. Mara approached without touching him. She watched his ears, breathing, and the way he shifted weight from one hind leg to the other. Then she ran her hands along his neck, shoulder, and back. He was ridden hard for 5 or 6 miles, rested long enough to cool, then ridden hard again, she said. The shooter did not take him directly from here to Dry Creek. Gideon frowned. How can you know that? Mara lifted a fold of the saddle blanket. 2 separate layers of dried sweat darkened the wool, one beneath the other. First ride dried before the second began. He stopped somewhere for at least 2 hours. She crouched beside the gelding's left rear leg. A smear of black grease marked the white hair above the hoof. She rubbed it between her fingers and smelled it. This is not wagon grease. Nathaniel dismounted. What is it? Coal tar mixed with lamp oil. Railroad crews use it on bridge timbers. Gideon's mouth tightened. The nearest Western Plains survey camp stood 7 miles west of the ranch, beyond the ridge. Mara examined the girth next. The broken strap had not snapped under strain, as the gunman intended people to believe. It had been sliced nearly through with a narrow blade and torn the rest of the way by hand. Someone had deliberately damaged it after abandoning the horse. More important was the knot holding the replacement strap. It was a compact double hitch finished beneath the buckle, quick to release with one pull and difficult for a horse to loosen. Mara had seen the knot before, though rarely outside the southern cattle trails. Who saddled Bracken yesterday? She asked. Gideon answered carefully. Cal would have saddled his own horse. Does he tie a San Saba hitch? I don't know what he calls it. Show me something Cal saddled today. They crossed to the branding pen. Cal Dorsey was a lean man in his early 30s, with a narrow mustache and a healing burn across his right wrist. He seemed genuinely surprised to see Bracken back and more surprised to learn where the gelding had been found. Mara watched him saddle another horse. Cal tied the girth with a simple ranch knot, using his right hand. The person who had prepared Bracken had tied a San Saba hitch left-handed. Cal didn't saddle that horse for the shooter, Mara said, once they were out of earshot. That clears one man, Nathaniel replied. It identifies a habit, not a man. Gideon's expression had become unreadable. Only left-handed rider on this outfit is young Jamie Cole. Where is he? Nathaniel asked. North pasture with the yearlings. Been there since before dawn. Mara returned to Bracken and searched the saddle more carefully. Wedged beneath the rear skirt was a thread of gray wool, likely torn from the gunman's coat. The wool carried the same coal tar odor as the gelding's leg, but beneath it Mara found something else, a curl of fresh cedar shaving. She looked toward the barns. Where do you keep your railroad maps and land papers? Nathaniel's eyes shifted to the ranch house. In my father's cedar deed box. They entered the study together. The cedar box sat inside a locked cabinet behind Jonathan Reed's desk. Nathaniel opened the cabinet with the key on his watch chain. The box remained exactly where he had left it, but the brass lock bore a bright new scratch. He lifted the lid. The original deed, his father's will, and the survey showing the Spring Valley were gone. In their place lay one yellow prairie rose, crushed flat beneath a rifle cartridge. Mara looked at Nathaniel's bullet-pierced hat and understood the message immediately. The gunman had not merely entered Reed Crossing. He had entered Nathaniel's house, opened a locked cabinet, stolen the documents that could save the ranch, and returned to town in time to watch him waiting at the station. Nathaniel picked up the flower without touching the cartridge. Only 4 people knew where my father kept this box, he said. I'm one. Gideon is another. Royce Reed is the third. Mara waited. And the fourth? The woman who raised me, Nathaniel said. From the kitchen came the sound of a plate breaking. Mrs. Tully stood in the study doorway, staring at the empty cedar box as though she had just seen a grave opened. Nathaniel, she whispered, Royce was here last night. Mrs. Tully had served the Reed family for 22 years, and in all that time Nathaniel had never seen her frightened by anything smaller than a kitchen fire. Now she gripped the study doorframe with both hands and confessed that Royce Reed had arrived shortly before midnight, claiming Nathaniel had sent him for an old survey map. He had known Nathaniel was traveling to Dry Creek before dawn to meet Eleanor's train, and he had carried a note bearing what appeared to be Nathaniel's signature. Mrs. Tully had allowed him into the study, then left to prepare coffee while he searched. She had never opened the cabinet or touched the cedar box. Royce had remained alone for less than 10 minutes. "You did nothing wrong," Nathaniel told her. "The note was forged to deceive you. I should have known. You trusted a member of this family inside a house he has entered since childhood. The shame belongs to the man who used that trust." Mara watched Mrs. Tully's shoulders ease slightly. Nathaniel did not raise his voice, though the stolen documents could cost him everything. He did not turn fear into blame simply because blame was easier to carry. That told Mara more about him than 14 courtship letters could have done. Gideon Harper sent a rider to inform Sheriff Pike while Mara examined the cabinet. The lock had not been forced. The bright scratch came from a key inserted carelessly. Royce either possessed a duplicate or had taken Nathaniel's key long enough to copy it. The stolen papers gave him the legal description of the Spring Valley, the original deed, and the precise language of Jonathan Reed's will. The railroad receipt proved he had paid Eleanor, but without the original will, Nathaniel would have difficulty proving that Royce's interference had been designed to trigger the inheritance clause. "He didn't steal the papers to hide the condition," Mara said. "He stole them because something inside one of them hurts him." Nathaniel looked at the empty box. "My father made 3 copies of the will. The lawyer has one. The county clerk has another. Then the will is not what he fears. The survey? More likely." Mara lifted the cedar shaving she had found beneath Bracken's saddle. "A railroad does not pay $400 to frighten a bride unless 12 miles of land are worth much more than cattle." Nathaniel said the original survey had been completed 15 years earlier and included water measurements his father had commissioned privately. If those measurements showed the spring produced more water than the railroad's current maps admitted, ownership of Reed Crossing could determine the only practical location for a depot, water tower, and maintenance yard. That meant Royce was not negotiating over grazing land. He was selling control of the railroad's future route. Nathaniel looked toward the window, where his men continued branding calves as if the ranch were not being dismantled around them by letters, keys, and a man in a gray coat. "Friday's train leaves Dry Creek at 2, he said to Mara. "I'll have someone take you in after breakfast. You keep dismissing me politely. I'm trying not to get you killed rudely." The distinction is thoughtful. Mara packed her saddlebag that night anyway. She had done what she could. The receipt was in Sheriff Pike's hands. The ranch knew there was an intruder among them, and Nathaniel no longer stood alone on a station platform holding flowers for a woman who would never arrive. At dawn, however, a commotion erupted in the east pasture. 20 yearlings had broken through a fence and scattered toward the creek, while a pregnant bay mare lay thrashing near the gate. The hands went after the cattle. Mara went to the mare. One look at the animal's rigid belly, sweating neck, and repeated attempts to roll told her it was not an injury. "Colic," she said. "Get her walking, slowly. Do not let her lie down." Nathaniel took the lead rope without questioning her. For the next 2 hours, Mara worked beside him, listening to the mare's gut, mixing warm water with salt, and passing a greased length of tubing carefully through the animal's nostril to relieve the pressure. Nathaniel held the mare steady even when she struck his shoulder hard enough to bruise it. He asked what Mara needed and did precisely that, which was a rarer skill in men than roping. The mare finally shuddered, passed the obstruction, and lowered her head against Nathaniel's chest. By then, the sun had climbed high, and the scattered cattle had been recovered. Mara sat on the fence rail, exhausted, her sleeves wet to the elbows. Nathaniel brought her coffee in a tin cup. "You saved 2 lives in 2 days, he said. "The mare did most of the work. So did I at the station, according to Mrs. Tully. You appear determined to deny everyone credit, including yourself." In the distance, the noon train whistled as it approached Dry Creek. Mara looked toward the sound. If she left immediately, she could still reach town before 2. Nathaniel followed her gaze but said nothing. He did not ask her to stay. That silence made the choice harder, and, because it was hers, more honest. Mara drank the coffee. "Your mare should be watched through tonight." Nathaniel's expression remained carefully neutral. "I can manage that. You would miss the first signs if the obstruction returns. Possibly. And someone on this ranch still helped a gunman. True." Mara handed back the cup. "Then unpack my room. I'll stay until the documents are found, or Friday's next train, whichever comes first. That is 7 days. Try not to sound terrified. I was counting how many hats I own." Nathaniel smiled, and this time Mara did not look away. The moment lasted only seconds before hoofbeats approached from the southern road. Royce Reed entered the yard accompanied by a court deputy and Cyrus Vane of the Western Plains Land Office. Royce was handsome in the polished, deliberate manner of a man who had never allowed weather to make a decision about his appearance. He dismounted, glanced at Mara's wet sleeves, and smiled, as if he had already heard the story he intended to tell about her. The deputy handed Nathaniel a folded petition. Royce had asked the territorial court to declare that any marriage Nathaniel entered before May 1 be presumed fraudulent unless the woman could prove a prior attachment independent of the inheritance. Your intended bride fled, Royce said. Now a stranger appears, shoots at a hotel window, and moves into your home the same day. Even frontier judges recognize theater when they see it. Nathaniel stepped forward, but Mara touched his arm before he could answer. You paid Eleanor Bell $400, she said. Royce's smile did not move, but Cyrus Vane's did. Just slightly. Enough. Mara saw it. Then you stole the original survey and sent a rifleman to make certain Nathaniel never reached a judge alive, she continued. That is a serious accusation, Royce said. No, Mara replied. It is a list. The accusation comes after we prove which man on this ranch opened the gate for you. Royce looked at her properly then, no longer as an inconvenient substitute bride, but as a threat he had failed to price. He reached into his coat, removed a money draft, and held it toward her. $500, more than twice what I paid Miss Bell. Take the afternoon train. Mara looked at the paper, then at Nathaniel. He did not speak for her. He simply stood beside her wearing a hat with a bullet hole through its crown. Mara tore the draft in half. You bought the wrong woman, she said. Royce's face lost its smile. The deputy unfolded a second document. There will be a hearing in Dry Creek on April 28th, he announced. Until then, Mr. Reed is forbidden from removing, selling, or concealing any ranch records or entering a marriage intended solely to defeat the will. Royce mounted his horse. 11 days, cousin. Then the valley belongs to me. Mara watched him ride away beside Cyrus Vane. Only after they crossed the gate did she open her hand. During the confrontation, she had quietly pulled something from the wet cuff of Cyrus Vane's coat when he brushed past her. A short strand of gray wool, smelling unmistakably of coal tar. Mara laid the two strands of gray wool side by side on Nathaniel's desk, one recovered from beneath Bracken's saddle, and the other pulled from Cyrus Vane's coat. Under a magnifying lens borrowed from Gideon Harper, the fibers showed the same tight weave, the same black coal tar residue, and even the same faint line of blue thread running through the gray. It did not prove Vane had fired the rifle, but it proved his coat had touched the stolen saddle before the attack. Mara wrapped each strand separately in clean paper, sealed the folds with candle wax, and made Nathaniel, Gideon, and Mrs. Tully sign across the seams. A clever lawyer will say you switched them, Nathaniel said. Then 3 witnesses will say I didn't. You have done this before. Cattle disputes are mostly court cases with horns. My father taught me to preserve brands, receipts, hoof marks, and lies in equal measure. They rode to the Western Plains survey camp that afternoon, not to confront Cyrus Vane, but to learn who had seen him and what work the company had already completed. The camp occupied a flat stretch west of the ridge, 7 miles from Reed Crossing, where canvas tents surrounded drafting tables, stacked bridge timber, and barrels of the coal tar mixture Mara had smelled on Bracken. Vane had not yet returned from Royce's ranch, leaving a young assistant engineer named Peter Lyle in charge. Peter tried to send them away, until Nathaniel noticed a map pinned beneath a stone on the central table. The route line crossed the Reed Spring Valley, exactly where Jonathan Reed's missing survey predicted the highest water flow. Beside the spring, someone had written in fresh pencil, 82,000 gallons daily, dry season minimum 61,000. Nathaniel went still. Those figures came from my father's private survey. Peter's face lost what little color it possessed. Mr. Vane brought them this morning. Before or after he accompanied Royce Reed to my ranch? Before. Mara stepped closer to the table. What time? Near dawn. He arrived on foot. On foot from where? Peter hesitated. He did not say. His coat was torn, and there was blood on one sleeve, but he said he'd fallen near the bridge cut. Nathaniel's gaze moved toward the long rifle case resting beside Vane's closed tent. Peter followed it and immediately shook his head. That belongs to the company. We use it for wolves. Open it, Mara said. I cannot. Then don't. Sheriff Pike can. Peter looked from her to Nathaniel, understanding that refusing would protect no one once a warrant arrived. He lowered his voice. Mr. Vane did not come alone. A young man met him at the eastern timber stack. Ranch hand, I think. Thin, fair-haired, left-handed. Mr. Vane gave him money and a small envelope. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Jamie Cole. I never heard the name. Did the young man leave with Vane? Mara asked. No. He rode north. He looked frightened. Peter pulled a folded sheet from beneath the route map. It was a tracing made from Jonathan Reed's original survey, including his signature and surveyor's seal. Nathaniel asked Peter to testify that Vane had brought it to camp that morning. Peter refused at first, explaining that Western Plains paid his wages and supported his widowed mother in Ohio. Mara did not threaten him. She simply asked whether his mother had raised him to build railroads from stolen land. Peter stared at the map for a long time, then made a second tracing in his own hand, dated it, and wrote a statement describing Vane's arrival. He kept the original at camp to avoid alerting Vane, but gave Nathaniel the copy. If I lose my position, Peter said, I expect you to remember I am an engineer, not a ranch hand. If you lose your position for telling the truth, I'll employ you to survey every spring, fence, and irrigation ditch on Reed land, Nathaniel replied. You will probably regret that, Mara said. His fences are distressingly straight already. Peter almost smiled. Clouds gathered during the ride home, turning the afternoon cold. Rain began as they crossed the ridge. Mara's trail coat resisted weather through stubbornness rather than design, and within 10 minutes, water had darkened it from shoulder to hem. Nathaniel removed his heavier coat and held it toward her. No, you are shivering. I have endured rain before. So has my barn. I still repair the roof. He did not attempt to place the coat around her. He kept it extended, leaving the decision in her hands. Mara took it. The lining held the faint sense of cedar smoke and horses. It was too large, warm, and more intimate than she wanted to admit. They rode in silence until Nathaniel said, You never explained why you were on Eleanor's train. Mara had been hired to accompany 60 breeding heifers from Colorado to a buyer near Fort Laramie. The animals remained 2 cars behind Eleanor's passenger coach until Mara delivered them at Dry Creek's northern stock pens the morning before the shooting. She had intended to collect her payment and continue south, where her father's cattle outfit waited. Your father expects you home? Nathaniel asked. He expects me wherever the work is. And marriage? He expects me to have enough sense not to surrender my name, wages, or saddle to obtain it. Nathaniel did not laugh. Mara explained that she had once been engaged to a trail boss named Warren Cobb. Warren admired her ability to move cattle until he understood she intended to continue doing it after the wedding. He then proposed selling her share of the family outfit, buying a house in Denver, and allowing her to ride when it suited the household. Mara had returned his ring the same afternoon. He did not want a wife, she said. He wanted my work to make him successful and my silence to make him comfortable. Nathaniel watched the trail ahead. Eleanor may have believed I wanted the same. Did you? I wanted someone willing to help me keep the ranch. I gave too little thought to what she would need to keep herself. The admission was quiet and carried no demand that Mara forgive it. She respected him more for recognizing the failure before another woman was forced to teach it to him. When they reached Reed Crossing near dusk, Jamie Cole had not returned from the north pasture. Gideon assumed the rain had delayed him until Mara entered the bunkhouse and found Jamie's bed stripped of its blanket. Beneath the mattress lay $40 in railroad scrip and an unsigned note. Bring the South Camp key to the timber stack. Saddle Bracken and leave him there. Do this, and your brother's debt disappears. Speak, and the penitentiary learns who helped him escape. Nathaniel read it twice. Jamie's older brother had fled custody the previous year after a saloon robbery. Jamie had hidden him for one night, an act that could be prosecuted as aiding a fugitive. Royce or Vane had discovered the truth and used it to force the boy into providing the key and horse. He may not have known about the shooting, Mara said. Gideon's jaw tightened. He should have come to me. Shame makes frightened people protect the men hurting them, Nathaniel replied. We find him before we judge him. A horse galloped into the yard before anyone could saddle. It was Jamie's chestnut mare, reins tangled beneath her neck and foam streaking her shoulders. Gideon caught her at the corral gate. A dark stain marked the saddle. Mara touched it and lifted blood-covered fingers. The blood was still warm. Tied to the saddle horn was Nathaniel's stolen cabinet key, and beneath it hung a fresh strip of gray wool. Nathaniel reached for his rifle. Mara was already running toward her mare. "The north pasture," she said. "If Jamie is alive, Vane wants us to find him before the rain destroys whatever happened there." "And if it's a trap?" Gideon called. Mara swung into the saddle. "Then this time we know we're riding into it." Rain erased ordinary tracks quickly, but blood did not behave like mud, and Mara followed what remained of Jamie Cole's trail north, by reading the things the storm could not hide. A crushed patch of wild rye showed where his mare had stumbled. Blood marked the underside of sage leaves rather than their tops, telling Mara the wound was low and still flowing while he rode. At the northern creek crossing, the hoofprints turned west toward Slate Ridge, instead of continuing to the yearling pasture. "He didn't choose that direction," Nathaniel said. "Why?" "The creek is rising. A wounded man would take the shortest road home." Mara pointed to a second set of tracks, nearly washed away beside Jamie's. Another horse crowded him from the south. Someone drove him west. Gideon Harper had remained behind to guard the ranch and send a rider for Sheriff Pike, leaving Mara and Nathaniel alone beneath a sky that had darkened 2 hours before sunset. They followed the trail into a narrow limestone cut where the rainwater ran ankle-deep between the rocks. Nathaniel knew an abandoned lambing cabin stood beyond the ridge, but the direct path crossed Slate Creek, which had become a brown, violent ribbon. He guided Mara uphill through a stand of twisted juniper to an old cattle crossing built on buried stone. The water reached their horses' bellies, but the footing held. On the opposite bank, Mara found Jamie's hat pinned beneath a branch and a broad stain of blood on the trunk of a cottonwood. "He was still mounted here," she said. "The blood is shoulder high. How much has he lost?" "Enough that we stopped talking." They reached the cabin at dusk. Jamie's mare had passed through, but another horse had circled behind the structure and ridden away east. Light flickered weakly through the single dirty window. Nathaniel dismounted first, but Mara caught his sleeve. A thin wire ran from the door latch through a gap in the wall. Inside, the wire had been tied around the handle of a lantern balanced above an open bucket of kerosene. Anyone opening the door would pull the lantern down and set the cabin on fire. "They expected us," Nathaniel whispered. "Or expected Jamie to free himself." A faint groan came from within. Nathaniel knew the roof had a loose section above the rear wall where winter snow had broken 2 boards. He climbed onto the low lean-to while Mara cut the wire from outside. Nathaniel removed the damaged boards, lowered himself into the cabin, and lifted the lantern away from the kerosene before opening the door. Jamie lay behind the wood stove with his wrists tied and a bullet wound through the fleshy part of his left thigh. The shot had missed the bone and large artery, but he had lost enough blood to become cold, confused, and dangerously weak. Mara cut away the trouser leg, packed the wound with clean cloth, and wrapped it tightly, while Nathaniel kept Jamie awake. "Look at me," Nathaniel ordered. "You can apologize after you live." Jamie tried anyway. "I gave them the key. We know. I saddled Bracken. We know that too." Jamie's eyes filled. "I didn't know they meant to shoot you. Vane said they only needed Miss Bell frightened and the survey copied. He knew about my brother, said he'd send the letter to the marshal if I refused." Nathaniel held the boy's shoulders steady as Mara tightened the bandage. "Who shot you?" "Vane." "Was Vane the rifleman at the hotel?" Mara asked. Jamie shook his head. "No. Man named Harlan Dace. Used to guard payroll trains. Missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Vane gave him the gray coat so witnesses would describe the wrong man. Dace tied that southern hitch because he lost the fingers on his right hand and does most things left-handed now." The pieces settled into place. Cyrus Vane's wool had been beneath Bracken's saddle because he had delivered the horse and coat to Dace. Dace had fired from the hotel, escaped on Bracken, rested at the survey camp, and abandoned the gelding near the grain warehouse after changing horses. Vane had then returned to camp, wearing another coat, with Nathaniel's stolen survey. "Why did Vane shoot you today?" Nathaniel asked. Jamie reached weakly toward his right boot. Mara removed it and found a folded page concealed beneath the insole. I followed him after the station, Jamie whispered. Saw him put a ledger in his tent. I took one page. Thought if I brought it to you, maybe you'd believe I didn't know about the killing. The ledger page listed 4 payments in Vane's hand. $400 to EB, $150 to HD, $40 to JC, and $200 to RR. Beside the final entry were the words county copy and hearing witness. Royce paid someone at the courthouse, Nathaniel said. To remove the clerk's copy of the survey or purchase false testimony, Mara replied. Maybe both. Jamie began shaking. Mara wrapped him in Nathaniel's coat, the one she had worn during the ride from the survey camp. Nathaniel did not hesitate before giving it up, though the night had turned cold. They dismantled the lantern trap and used the kerosene only to strengthen the stove fire. Moving Jamie through the flood in darkness would kill him, so they remained in the cabin until dawn. Mara cleaned the wound again, while Nathaniel heated water, tore his own shirt into additional bandages, and followed every instruction without asking whether a task belonged to a man or woman. Once Jamie slept, Nathaniel sat across from Mara beside the stove, soaked, exhausted, and hatless. His bullet-pierced hat rested on the floor between them. You missed your train, he said. I noticed. You can take the next one after the hearing, possibly. I will not ask you to remain because the will requires a wife. Mara looked at him through the firelight. Good. And I will not offer marriage as payment for saving my life, my mare, my ranch hand, or possibly my land. Even better. But if I survive Royce, Vane, Dace, and my father's opinion from beyond the grave, I would like the chance to ask you to stay for a reason that has nothing to do with any of them. Mara's hands went still around the coffee cup. Nathaniel had not asked for an answer. He had simply laid the truth between them and left her free to approach it or walk away. Then survive first, she said. We can argue about your reasons afterward. Nathaniel smiled. You assume there will be an argument. I have known you 6 days. There will be several. Before dawn, Mara picked up his damaged hat and examined the bullet hole. From her repair kit, she cut a circle of soft leather and stitched it beneath the crown so rain could no longer enter. She left the outer hole visible. You could have hidden it, Nathaniel said. A repair should stop the damage, Mara replied. It should not pretend the damage never happened. He put the hat on and touched the patch inside the crown. Neither of them said what the gesture meant, because naming certain things too early can frighten them into becoming smaller. At first light, the creek dropped enough to cross. They built a sling between the 2 horses and carried Jamie back toward Reed Crossing. Gideon and Sheriff Pike met them at the northern gate. Pike listened to Jamie's confession, examined the ledger page, and immediately sent deputies to arrest Cyrus Vane and Harlan Dace. The posse returned near noon with Vane in handcuffs, but no Dace. The rifle case at the survey camp was empty, Peter Lyle had disappeared, and fresh tracks led south toward Dry Creek. Vane smiled when Nathaniel confronted him. You have a frightened boy, stolen railroad papers, and wool from a coat owned by half the men between here and Cheyenne, he said. Dace is gone, your survey is gone, and by the time of the hearing, your witnesses will be gone as well. Sheriff Pike tightened the handcuffs. That sounded close to a threat. It was a prediction. A shot echoed from the direction of the ranch house. Everyone turned. Smoke rose above the study window, black and sudden. Dace had not fled south. He had circled back to Reed Crossing, and Mrs. Tully was still inside. Nathaniel reached the ranch house first, but Mara caught the back of his coat before he could charge through the front door. Smoke rolled beneath the porch roof, and flames already filled the study windows. If you run in blind, Mrs. Tully will have 2 people to rescue, Mara said. Nathaniel forced himself to stop. Gideon divided the hands into 2 bucket lines from the horse trough, while Sheriff Pike ordered Vane secured inside the stone smokehouse under guard. Mara circled the building, testing windows and listening through the roar. The study was burning hardest, which meant Dace had entered for the papers, or intended everyone to believe he had. The kitchen remained mostly clear, but its outside door had been wedged shut with an iron spike. Nathaniel kicked it open. Mrs. Tully, he shouted. A muffled pounding answered from beneath the stairs. They found her locked inside the pantry with her wrists bound and a cloth tied across her mouth. Mara cut her free and led her into the yard. Mrs. Tully coughed until she could speak. He wanted the ledger page and Peter Lyle's tracing. I told him they were with the sheriff. Did you see his face? Pike asked. left hand missing 2 fingers, scar from his ear to his collar. He searched upstairs, then poured kerosene through the study. Her eyes widened. "Nathaniel, your father's Bible." "I hid Peter's tracing inside it after you left for Jamie." The Bible sat on the second floor in Jonathan Reed's former bedroom, directly above the burning study. Nathaniel looked at the flames climbing the staircase. "Leave it," Mara said. "It is only paper. It is the only copy Peter signed." Then we find Peter and ask him to sign another. A gunshot cracked from behind the barn. The bullet struck the porch post beside Sheriff Pike. Dace had never entered the house merely to burn it. He had remained nearby, waiting for the fire to draw Nathaniel into the open. Pike and the ranch hands scattered for cover. Mara saw movement along the windmill platform, a dark figure descending the ladder with a rifle held awkwardly in his left hand. "Windmill!" she shouted. Dace fired again. Nathaniel shoved Mrs. Tully behind the stone water trough and returned one shot, forcing Dace down behind the pump housing. Mara ran along the corral fence, using the smoke as cover. Dace could not see her without exposing himself to Nathaniel, and Nathaniel understood her movement without needing it explained. He fired at the iron housing, not to hit Dace, but to keep him pinned. Mara reached the windmill base and found fresh hoofprints leading away toward the eastern ridge. A second horse waited behind the hay shed. Dace had prepared an escape. She cut the saddle girth halfway through, then slipped back behind the fence just as Dace descended. He reached the horse, mounted, and drove his heels into its sides. The horse lunged. The weakened girth snapped. Dace and the saddle struck the ground together. He rolled, raised the rifle, and fired blindly. The shot passed through Nathaniel's upper sleeve and grazed his arm. Mara drew her revolver but did not shoot. Dace had landed behind a stack of hay bales, with only the top of his head visible. "Drop the rifle," Pike called. Dace answered by firing toward the sheriff. Nathaniel moved along the trough, trying to gain a clear angle. Mara saw Dace's free hand reach toward the hay. A kerosene bottle lay beside him with a rag tied around its neck. If he ignited it, the fire would jump from the hay shed to the barn and trap 50 horses. Mara picked up a loose horseshoe, stepped from behind the fence, and threw it hard against the iron windmill tower. The clang drew Dace's eyes for one instant. Nathaniel crossed the open ground, struck the rifle barrel upward, and drove Dace against the hay. They fell together. Dace reached for a knife. Mara kicked it from his hand before Pike and Gideon dragged him upright. The missing fingers on his right hand, the gray wool fibers clinging to his shirt, and the powder burns along his left cuff matched every piece of evidence Mara had collected. Pike shackled him beside Vane in the smokehouse. Dace refused to speak until Pike showed him Vane already in irons. Then loyalty began to look less profitable. Vane paid for the station job, Dace said. Royce paid Vane. I was told to frighten Reed first, kill him if the woman stepped off the train, and make the whole thing look like a quarrel over a mail-order bride. "Where is Peter Lyle?" Mara demanded. Dace smiled through a split lip. "Not here. We noticed. Vane had him taken before the survey camp was searched. Peter saw too much and copied more than he was told. If you want him alive, bring Vane's ledger page and every copy of the survey to the unfinished trestle at Crow Gorge by midnight tomorrow." "Who has him?" Pike asked. "2 railroad guards Royce bought, men who know what happens if Peter reaches that hearing." Dace nodded toward the burning house. "The fire was meant to keep all of you busy until the guards moved him south." While Pike questioned Dace, the bucket lines finally contained the flames. The study was destroyed, and part of the second floor had collapsed, but the kitchen, parlor, and west bedrooms survived. Nathaniel stood in the yard, watching smoke escape through the ruined roof. Mara examined the graze on his arm. The bullet had torn skin but missed the bone. "You chose Mrs. Tully over the tracing," she said while cleaning it. "There was no choice. There is always a choice. Some men simply make the correct one before fear gives them time to calculate." Nathaniel watched her tie the bandage. "You cut Dace's saddle knowing I would understand what you were doing." "I hoped you would. That is the first unkind thing you have said to me. You survived it." Nathaniel lifted his repaired hat from the mud. The leather patch Mara had sewn inside the crown had held through the rain, smoke, and fight. He brushed ash from the brim and placed it back on his head. "You could still leave before the hearing," he said. "Dace has been captured. Vane is in custody. Whatever happens at Crow Gorge is mine to finish." Mara tightened the knot on his bandage more sharply than necessary. If you tell me one more time that I am free to leave, I may exercise that freedom solely to avoid hearing it again. I need you to know I will not use danger, gratitude, or my father's will to bind you here. Mara looked at the house, the injured ranch hand sleeping in the bunkhouse, Mrs. Tully wrapped in a blanket near the kitchen garden, and the men carrying water through smoke to save what remained of Nathaniel's home. You are not binding me, she said. I am choosing where I stand. Something in Nathaniel's face changed. Not surprise, not relief, but the careful breaking of a loneliness he had carried so long he had mistaken it for character. Mara touched his uninjured hand. He closed his fingers around hers, gently enough that she could withdraw, and firmly enough that she knew he hoped she would not. The moment ended when Mrs. Tully approached, carrying the scorched cedar deed box. This was beneath the study window, she said. The fire blew it into the yard. Inside, the wood had blackened but not burned through. The box was empty except for the crushed yellow prairie rose and the rifle cartridge Dace had left behind. Mara removed the flower. Its petals had turned brown at the edges, yet the stem remained intact. Keep it, Nathaniel said. Why? Because it was meant for the wrong woman. Mara looked at the flower, then at him. Perhaps it simply arrived before either of us understood where it belonged. Before Nathaniel could answer, Sheriff Pike called them to the smokehouse. Cyrus Vane had finally agreed to speak. He claimed Royce Reed had not ordered Peter Lyle killed. Royce wanted the engineer brought to Crow Gorge because Peter possessed something more dangerous than the copied survey, a letter written by Jonathan Reed before his death, naming Royce's secret financial interest in Western Plains and declaring him legally unfit to inherit any portion of the ranch. The letter had been hidden inside the missing original survey. Peter had taken it from Vane's tent before Dace captured him. If the letter reached the judge, Royce's claim would collapse, regardless of Nathaniel's marriage. If it disappeared, Mara and Nathaniel would have only one day left to save Peter, recover the letter, and return for the hearing. Nathaniel looked toward the southern ridge, where darkness had already begun gathering above Crow Gorge. We ride at first light, he said. Mara folded the scorched prairie rose inside her glove. No, she replied. They expect us at first light. We ride now. They left Reed Crossing before the eastern sky had even begun to pale. Sheriff Pike rode with Nathaniel and Mara as far as the fork above Crow Gorge, while Gideon took 2 ranch hands along the northern ridge to block the railroad trail. No lanterns burned. Mara guided them by moonlight, following the faint scars wagon wheels had left between the sagebrush. Half a mile from the unfinished trestle, she dismounted and pressed her palm against the ground. 3 horses passed here, she whispered. One was carrying double. They're still ahead of us. Nathaniel looked toward the black outline of the gorge. Royce? Maybe. But whoever planned this wants you angry enough to ride straight into the open. Mara tied her mare beneath a sandstone shelf and removed the coiled rope from her saddle. So we won't give him what he wants. The unfinished railroad trestle stretched across Crow Gorge like the skeleton of some enormous animal. Timber supports disappeared into darkness, and the wind moaned through gaps where iron rails had not yet been laid. A lantern burned near the center of the structure. Peter Lyle sat bound to a vertical beam beneath it, his face bruised and one sleeve dark with blood. 2 armed guards stood on either side of him. Royce Reed waited at the entrance to the trestle, dressed in a clean traveling coat, as though he had come to negotiate a bank loan instead of a man's life. You took your time, cousin, Royce called. Nathaniel stepped from behind the rocks with both hands visible. His revolver remained in its holster. The bullet hole in his patched black hat showed clearly in the lantern glow. Let Peter go. Give me the ledger page, every copy of the spring survey, and my uncle's letter. Nathaniel's expression did not change, but Mara saw his right hand tighten once before relaxing. That was confirmation enough. Peter still had Jonathan Reed's letter, and Royce did not know where. I brought what you asked for, Nathaniel said. He held up a leather document case. From beneath the trestle, Mara watched through a lattice of beams. Sheriff Pike had moved along the western slope, while Gideon's men circled toward the horses. The plan depended on patience, but the gorge wind was strengthening, and Peter's chair stood dangerously close to an unfinished section of decking, A rope ran from the back of his chair over a crossbeam and down to the hand of the taller guard. One hard pull would drag Peter backward through the open frame. Royce gestured toward the center of the trestle. "Bring it here." Nathaniel walked forward. Each plank groaned beneath his boots. When he came within 20 feet of Peter, the shorter guard raised a shotgun. "Far enough," Royce said. "Throw down the case." "Release him first." Royce smiled. "You never understood business. A man gives away only what he can afford to lose. That explains why you keep giving away other people's lives." The smile vanished. Royce seized Peter by the hair and pressed a pistol against his temple. "The ranch, then. Sign over Reed Crossing," and the engineer walks away. Nathaniel stared at him. Everything his father had built lay behind that choice. The Spring Valley, the cattle, the house his mother had entered as a bride, and the graves beneath the cottonwoods. Mara knew what the land meant to him. She also knew the precise moment he decided it did not outweigh the life of the frightened young man tied before him. "Put the transfer in front of me," Nathaniel said. Peter jerked against his ropes. "No." "Mr. Reed, the letter proves—" The tall guard pulled the line. Peter's chair scraped toward the gap. "Stop!" Nathaniel shouted. "I'll sign." Royce removed a folded document from his coat and laid it on an empty timber crate. Nathaniel approached slowly. The shorter guard kept the shotgun aimed at his chest while Royce offered him a fountain pen. Below them, Mara looped her rope around a diagonal brace. She had studied the trestle from the ridge and noticed that the support beneath Peter had not yet been pinned into the main frame. Railroad crews had left a lifting cable attached to it, its free end wound around an iron capstan on the lower platform. If she could shift the brace 3 feet, it would create a narrow ledge directly under Peter's chair. He might still fall, but he would not fall into the gorge. Mara fed her rope through the capstan and pulled. The mechanism resisted. She wrapped the rope around her waist, braced both boots against a beam, and leaned back with everything she had. The capstan turned half an inch, then another. Wood groaned above her. Royce heard it. "What was that?" "The wind," Nathaniel said, uncapping the pen. Royce watched him place the nib against the transfer. "All these years proving you were the better son, the better rancher, the better Reed, and now you surrender it for a clerk whose name you barely knew yesterday." Nathaniel looked up. "That is why you will never own Reed Crossing, even if my name is on your paper. Land isn't held by the man willing to kill for it. It's held by the people willing to protect one another on it." Royce's face twisted. "Sign." Nathaniel signed. Royce snatched the paper and stepped back. Now the case. Nathaniel tossed it across the planks. It struck the crate and opened. The ledger page and survey tracing slid into the lantern light. Royce crouched to gather them. Mara pulled the rope with one last violent effort. The lower brace swung into place beneath Peter, just as Sheriff Pike rose from behind the western rail. "Drop your weapons!" The tall guard panicked and yanked Peter's line. The chair toppled backward through the opening, but fell only 4 feet before crashing onto the brace Mara had moved. Peter cried out, suspended above the gorge but alive. The shorter guard fired at Pike. Nathaniel drove his shoulder into the man before he could fire again. The shotgun discharged into the sky. Royce grabbed the lantern and threw it onto the documents. Flame raced over the leather case. Then he ran. Mara climbed onto the brace, crawled toward Peter, and cut the rope binding his chest. "Can you use your hands? They're numb." "Then trust mine." She fastened her rope beneath his arms and shouted to Gideon above. The foreman and one of the ranch hands hauled Peter onto the decking. Mara had almost followed when a scream echoed from the far end of the trestle. Royce had reached the unfinished span. A plank broke beneath him, and he dropped through the frame. He caught a crossbeam with both hands and hung over 200 feet of darkness. Nathaniel reached the edge and dropped to his stomach. "Give me your wrist." Royce stared upward, stunned. "You would save me?" "I'm not becoming you." For a moment, Royce seemed unable to understand the answer. Then one hand slipped. Nathaniel lunged and caught his wrist. The strain dragged him halfway over the edge until Mara threw herself across his legs and locked both arms around his knees. Pike seized Nathaniel's belt. Together, they pulled Royce onto the planks. Royce lay gasping. Sheriff Pike rolled him over and fastened iron cuffs around his wrists. Near the burning document case, the ledger page curled into black ash. The survey tracing followed. Nathaniel watched the evidence disappear, then looked at Peter. The young engineer reached inside the torn lining of his vest and removed a narrow oilskin packet. "Mr. Vane searched my coat and boots," he said. "He never searched the padding over my ribs." Inside the packet rested Jonathan Reed's letter, bearing his signature and the faded seal of the Territorial Land Office. A second folded sheet contained Peter's dated notes, documenting Vane's attempt to alter the survey. Royce stopped struggling. Sheriff Pike read the first lines and gave a low whistle. "This will be difficult to explain at the hearing." Nathaniel picked up the signed transfer from where Royce had dropped it. The paper had torn across the bottom during the struggle, but his signature remained intact. "He may still claim I surrendered the ranch willingly." "No," Mara said. She pointed to the signature line. Nathaniel had used the fountain pen Royce provided, but rainwater dripping through the beams had already begun washing the fresh ink into blue streaks. Above it, the witness section remained blank. Peter managed a tired smile. A land transfer executed under threat, without witnesses, and never delivered to the county recorder has no legal force. Nathaniel tore the page once, then stopped. He handed it to Sheriff Pike instead. "Keep it. Let the judge see exactly what Royce tried to buy with a man's life." Dawn reached the gorge as they led the prisoners toward the horses. Pale gold touched the red cliffs and turned the river below into a ribbon of fire. Mara stood at the edge of the trail, winding her rope with trembling hands now that the danger had passed. Nathaniel came beside her. "You knew I would sign away the ranch." "I hoped you would." "That is not especially flattering." "It is the most flattering thing I have ever believed about a man." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he removed his patched hat and held it against his chest. "Mara, if tomorrow's hearing saves Reed Crossing, the will still requires me to marry before May 1st. I know, but I will not ask you because of the will. And I will not accept an answer while you feel you owe me anything." She opened the glove tucked into her belt and touched the scorched yellow prairie rose hidden inside. "Then ask me after the hearing, when neither the ranch nor a kidnapped man is standing between us." A trace of hope crossed his exhausted face. "And will you answer?" "Yes," Mara said, "but you may not like the answer." Before he could ask what she meant, Sheriff Pike called from the trail. A rider was approaching from Dry Creek at a dead gallop. The man carried a telegram in one hand. "Judge Halbrook moved the hearing," the rider shouted as he drew near. "It begins at noon today, and Cyrus Vane has already been released." Nathaniel's eyes hardened. "Released by whom?" The rider looked toward Royce. "By the new acting county commissioner," he said, "Royce Reed." The rider's news followed them all the way back to Dry Creek, like a second posse. Royce Reed had been appointed acting county commissioner 3 days earlier, filling a vacancy created when Commissioner Alden resigned without warning. The appointment carried no power to dismiss a territorial charge, but Royce had used the title to sign an emergency release order for Cyrus Vane, then persuaded a frightened deputy that questioning the document would cost him his badge. Royce arranged Vane's release before he rode to Crow Gorge, he said. If the kidnapping succeeded, they would have the evidence. If it failed, Vane would still have several hours to destroy whatever remained in town. Nathaniel looked toward the distant roofs of Dry Creek. The county copy. Mara remembered the notation on the ledger page before it burned. County copy. Hearing witness. Vane isn't running, she said. He's going to the records office. They rode the final 6 miles without sparing the horses. The clock above the Dry Creek Mercantile showed 11:23 when they reached Main Street. Townspeople were already gathering outside the courthouse, drawn by rumors of the Reed dispute and the smoke still visible above the ranch. Sheriff Pike took Royce and the 2 railroad guards through the front entrance. Gideon helped Peter Lyle down from his horse and led him toward the physician's office long enough to have his bleeding arm bound. Nathaniel started for the courthouse, but Mara caught his sleeve. Vane knows Pike will guard the hearing room, she said. So where would he enter? Nathaniel studied the brick building. The records office occupied the western wing, with one public door facing Main Street. Behind it ran a narrow alley used for coal deliveries. The back. They left the horses at the hitch rail and slipped around the livery stable. The alley appeared empty, but Mara smelled kerosene before she saw the thin curl of smoke beneath the records room door. Nathaniel kicked the door once. The wood held. Mara stepped back, drew the small revolver she had taken from Dace after the ranch fire, and fired into the iron lock. Nathaniel struck the door again, and it burst inward. Cyrus Vane stood beside an open records cabinet with a flaming bundle of paper in his hand. A trail of kerosene ran across the floor toward 3 shelves packed with deeds, tax rolls, and survey books. He threw the burning bundle down. Mara seized a wool horse blanket from the coal wagon and smothered the flames while Nathaniel crossed the room. Vane drew a derringer, but Nathaniel caught his wrist before he could aim. The shot buried itself in the ceiling. Vane drove an elbow into Nathaniel's ribs and lunged for the alley, only to find Mrs. Tully standing outside with Gideon's branding mallet held across both hands. "I have spent 30 years feeding Reed men," she said. "Do not make me discover whether one swings like a fence post." Vane stopped. Nathaniel removed the derringer and marched him inside. Beneath the scorched bundle, Mara found a survey register dated 1879. One page had been partly torn from its binding. The surviving section recorded Jonathan Reed's filing of the private spring survey, witnessed by the former county clerk and accompanied by a sealed declaration concerning succession rights. In the bottom corner appeared the clerk's notation, "Duplicate declaration placed in Territorial Land Office Archive, Cheyenne." Vane stared at the page and seemed to understand that his silence no longer mattered. "You could burn Dry Creek," Mara said, "and the truth would still be waiting in Cheyenne." At noon, Judge Amos Halbrook entered a courtroom crowded beyond its benches. Ranchers stood against the walls. Railroad men occupied the rear row. Eleanor Bell was not among them, but the station master had brought a telegram she had sent from Laramie after learning of the shooting. It confirmed that Royce had paid her $400 to remain on the train, and had warned that Nathaniel Reed intended to imprison any woman who arrived as his bride. The lie had been cruel enough to frighten her, and specific enough to expose the man who invented it. Royce sat beside a lawyer from Cheyenne, his clean coat now torn at the shoulder. Vane sat under guard near Sheriff Pike. Harlan Dace had been brought from the jail with his wrists chained. Jamie Cole, pale but upright, occupied the first bench with Mrs. Tully beside him. Mara stood behind Nathaniel at the petitioner's table until he pulled out the chair next to his own. "Beside me," he said quietly. "That is where the work was done." The hearing lasted nearly 4 hours. Peter testified that Cyrus Vane ordered him to redraw the proposed railroad spur so that it crossed Reed Crossing's Spring Valley, then demanded that he erase Jonathan Reed's earlier survey from the engineering map. He produced his dated field notes and Jonathan's oilskin-wrapped letter. Jamie admitted giving Vane the deed box key in exchange for money and a promise to hide his brother, but he also described Vane shooting him after the arrangement began to unravel. Sheriff Pike testified about the ledger page, naming each payment from memory before presenting the scorched leather case recovered at Crow Gorge. Dace refused to speak until the judge reminded him that Royce had already tried to leave him carrying the murder charge alone. The missing fingers on Dace's right hand, the station bullet, the stolen gray coat, and Bracken's saddle connected him to the attack too tightly for loyalty to remain profitable. At last Dace turned toward Royce. He said Reed had to die before the woman stepped off the train, said a dead bachelor couldn't satisfy the will. A murmur swept through the room. Royce rose so quickly that his chair fell backward. "He is a hired killer trying to save his neck." "Yes," Judge Halbrook said, "which is why his statement matters only where physical evidence and independent witnesses support it. Unfortunately for you, Mr. Reed, they support nearly every word." Mara then placed the partially burned survey register on the judge's desk. She explained the kerosene trail, the torn page, and where she had found Vane. Nathaniel presented Jonathan Reed's letter. In it, his father declared that Royce secretly owned shares in a holding company used by Western Plains Railroad to acquire disputed land, and that this concealed interest made him legally and morally unfit to receive Reed Crossing. Royce's lawyer argued that the letter was private, unrecorded, and therefore meaningless. Judge Halbrook examined the seal, then compared its filing number with the surviving register. "It was recorded," Mara said. "The The duplicate is in Cheyenne. The judge looked at her. How can you be certain? Because Mr. Vane tried to burn the book that tells us where it is. For the first time that day, Cyrus Vane lowered his head. Judge Halbrook ordered Royce's appointment as acting commissioner suspended pending a territorial investigation. He remanded Vane, Dace, and the guards into Sheriff Pike's custody and issued warrants concerning bribery, attempted murder, kidnapping, arson, and destruction of public records. Then he ruled that Royce Reed could not inherit or exercise control over Reed Crossing. Nathaniel exhaled, but the judge had not finished. Jonathan Reed's marriage condition remains, Halbrook said. This court may disqualify an unlawful successor. It may not rewrite a lawful testament merely because the deceased chose an unwise method of encouraging grandchildren. Mr. Reed must be legally married before midnight, when April 30th becomes May 1st. Otherwise, the ranch remains in probate until a territorial court names the next eligible heir. Western Plains may petition for a receiver during that delay. Every face in the courtroom turned toward Mara. Nathaniel did not. He gathered his father's letter, placed it carefully inside the scorched cedar deed box, and closed the lid. Then let the ranch remain in probate. His lawyer gripped his arm. Nathaniel, you have 11 hours. Miss Hollis is already here. The judge can perform the ceremony. No. Nathaniel's answer was quiet, but it reached the back wall. Mara Hollis is not an instrument for curing a defect in my father's will. She will not be asked for her life with a courtroom watching the clock. The ranchers began whispering. Western Plains attorneys smiled for the first time all afternoon. Nathaniel ignored them all. Mara felt the crushed prairie rose inside her glove. Nathaniel had just offered up Reed Crossing a second time, first for Peter's life, now for her freedom to choose without pressure. She had spent years believing marriage meant being selected for usefulness, and kept only while that usefulness lasted. Yet the man beside her was willing to lose everything, rather than turn her answer into a transaction. She rose. If the hearing is finished, she said, I need to collect my belongings. Nathaniel's face revealed nothing, but his hand closed around the patched black hat resting on the table. I understand. No, Mara said. I don't believe you do. She walked to him and placed the scorched yellow rose in the bullet hole of his hat. Meet me at the Dry Creek station at sunset, she said. Bring the hat. Leave the deed box here. Then she turned and walked out of the courtroom before anyone, including Nathaniel, could ask whether she intended to board the evening train or finally answer the question he had not yet dared to ask. At sunset, the westbound train appeared beyond the cottonwoods, trailing black smoke across a sky the color of hammered copper. Nathaniel waited alone on the Dry Creek platform, because Mara had asked him to come alone. He carried no deed box, no marriage license, and no lawyer's argument. He wore the patched black hat with the crushed yellow prairie rose tucked into its bullet hole, looking like a man dressed equally for a wedding and a gunfight, which was not entirely unusual in Wyoming. The train slowed with a grinding of iron. Nathaniel's heart sank when he saw Mara's trunk beside the station door. Her saddle rested against it, and the wedding dress Eleanor Bell had abandoned lay neatly folded inside an open traveling case. Mara emerged from the waiting room wearing her divided riding skirt, weathered boots, and the blue shirt she had worn the day she stepped off the livestock car. Her hair was braided beneath her cowgirl hat. She carried no flowers and wore nothing borrowed from Eleanor. You came, she said. You asked me to. You did not bring the deed box. No. Good. The conductor called the stop. 2 passengers descended while the station master loaded mail. Nathaniel glanced at Mara's trunk. Are you leaving? I wanted the choice to be real. A woman cannot choose to stay if she has no means to leave. She opened her hand. On her palm lay a ticket to Laramie, purchased with money she had earned before coming to Dry Creek. Nathaniel nodded, though the movement cost him. Then I will put your trunk aboard. He reached for it. Mara placed one boot on the lid. I did not say I was using the ticket. Hope rose in him so suddenly that he did not trust himself to speak. Mara looked at the prairie rose in his hat, then at the hand hanging uncertainly by his side. You expected Eleanor Bell. A gentle bride who could play the piano, pour coffee without spilling it, and remain safely inside while you handled the ranch. I was a fool. You paid agency fees, bought a wedding dress, and nearly married a woman who never intended to leave the train. All true. And instead you got a cowgirl who argued over water rights, cut a gunman's saddle girth, damaged a railroad trestle, and shot the lock off a government building. The judge seemed particularly troubled by that last one. He will recover. Her mouth curved, but her eyes remained serious. You bought the wrong bride. Nathaniel smiled. Then, just as he had on the platform when they first met, he held out his hand. No, he said. The wrong woman took the money. The right one chose whether to stay. Mara looked at his open hand without taking it. If I marry you, I will not be payment for saving the ranch. You will not. I will continue working cattle. I would be an idiot to stop you. I will have a legal interest in every improvement I help build, not a promise made beside a stove, a written interest. Half of Reed Crossing. Her eyebrows rose. That was quick. I had 11 hours to consider the terms. And if we disagree, we argue until one of us proves the other wrong. That may consume most of our marriage. I have been warned. Mara stepped closer. One more condition. If you ever introduce me as the woman who saved your ranch, I will correct you. What should I call you? The woman who helped you save it. Nathaniel's hand remained extended. Agreed. Only then did she place her palm in his. The train whistle sounded. The station master shouted that anyone traveling west had 30 seconds to board. Mara looked at the ticket one final time, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall into the empty traveling case. The waiting room door burst open. Mrs. Tully marched out carrying a white cake box, followed by Gideon, Sheriff Pike, Peter Lyle, Jamie Cole, and Judge Halbrook. They had obeyed Nathaniel's request to remain away from the platform for almost 7 minutes, which Mrs. Tully considered heroic restraint. Mara stared at them. You said you came alone. I did. They appear to have developed an independent understanding of geography. We were behind the freight shed, Gideon explained. That is not alone, Mara said. It is in Wyoming, Pike replied. Judge Halbrook produced a marriage license and a second document. Before anyone mistakes haste for carelessness, Mr. Reed asked his attorney to prepare a property covenant. It grants Mara Hollis 1/2 ownership of Reed Crossing upon confirmation of title, recognizes her separate property, and guarantees her the right to sell her interest back to the ranch at a fair valuation should she ever choose to leave. Mara read every line. Nathaniel waited without asking whether she trusted him. That patience meant more than the generous terms. She signed Mara Hollis. Nathaniel signed beneath her name. The judge witnessed the covenant, then glanced toward the courthouse clock. We have 5 hours before midnight. This ceremony need not be rushed. Mrs. Tully pushed the cake box into Gideon's hands. It has been rushed since the woman arrived in a cattle car. Get on with it. They married beneath the station lantern where Nathaniel had once waited for the bride described in a stack of letters. Mara made no promise to obey. Nathaniel made no promise to protect her from every danger, since experience had shown she usually reached danger first. They promised honesty, shared labor, and the freedom to speak hard truths without fearing abandonment. When Judge Halbrook pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel did not pull Mara toward him. He waited. She closed the distance herself and kissed him once, gently, but without hesitation. The courthouse clock struck 8. Sheriff Pike cleared his throat. Reed Crossing remains in the family. No, Nathaniel said, looking at Mara. It became one. 3 weeks later, the Territorial Land Office sent an authenticated duplicate of Jonathan Reed's declaration. Judge Halbrook confirmed Nathaniel's title, recorded Mara's half-interest, and denied Western Plains Railroad's request for control of the Spring Valley. Peter's field notes proved the railroad could build its spur 6 miles north without taking Reed Water, though the alternate route cost Cyrus Vane's employers considerably more. Faced with public testimony connecting their agent to bribery, arson, and attempted murder, the railroad directors abandoned Vane with the same efficiency he had shown when abandoning others. Royce's appointment was declared fraudulent. He and Vane were convicted on multiple territorial charges after separate trials. Harlan Dace testified in exchange for avoiding the gallows, though he spent the remainder of his useful years behind stone walls. No dramatic curse followed them. The truth, entered into public records they had failed to burn, proved punishment enough. Jamie Cole remained at Reed Crossing after his wounds healed. Nathaniel did not excuse what he had done, and Mara did not permit guilt to become an occupation. Jamie worked without wages for 6 months to repay the stolen $40 and the damage caused by his betrayal. Sheriff Pike later found his brother hiding near Casper. The young man surrendered, faced the charge he had fled, and received a shorter sentence than Vane's threats had led Jamie to fear. Peter Lyle resigned from Western Plains and opened a surveying office in Dry Creek. His first commission was to map every spring, fence, winter pasture, and cattle trail on Reed Crossing. Mara rode every mile with him, correcting 3 errors and 1 foolish assumption about where a horse could safely cross after rain. The ranch changed because she stayed, but it did not become hers by swallowing Nathaniel's life. It became theirs by making room for both. Mara improved the breeding herd with hardy mares from Montana, established a rotation system that protected the spring grass, and taught every ranch hand to inspect a saddle before mounting. Nathaniel rebuilt the burned study with wider windows and 2 desks facing each other. He taught her the accounting method his father had used. She taught him that a column of figures could be correct and still conceal a foolish decision. They argued often. Their first serious dispute concerned whether to sell 50 head before a hard winter. Mara wanted to sell. Nathaniel wanted to wait. She brought rainfall records, hay measurements, and the condition of the cow's teeth to the kitchen table. Nathaniel studied the evidence and sold 60. The winter killed cattle on nearly every neighboring spread. Reed Crossing lost 4. Nathaniel never resented being proved wrong. Mara eventually learned that admitting fear did not surrender authority. When their first child was born during a spring thunderstorm, she confessed that she was terrified she would disappear inside the duties expected of a wife and mother. Nathaniel responded by hiring 2 additional hands and carving 3 mornings each week out of the ranch schedule for her to ride the northern herd. He did not tell her she had nothing to fear. He changed the conditions that made the fear reasonable. Years later, their daughter found the old black hat hanging above the rebuilt study door. The leather patch remained inside the crown, and the bullet hole was still visible from across the room. "Why didn't Mama mend the outside?" the girl asked. Nathaniel lifted her so she could touch it. She said a repair should stop the damage, not pretend it never happened. Inside the scorched cedar deed box lay Jonathan Reed's authenticated letter, the marriage covenant, Mara's unused ticket torn into 2 pieces, and the yellow prairie rose, now dry and fragile between sheets of paper. The objects were not displayed as trophies. They were kept as evidence that a home could survive fire, fear, betrayal, and even a badly written will, provided the people inside it refused to confuse possession with love. On their 25th anniversary, Nathaniel took Mara back to the Dry Creek station. The livestock car was long gone, the platform had been rebuilt, and passenger trains now stopped beneath electric lamps. Nathaniel wore the same patched hat, though his hair beneath it had turned silver. He held out his hand. Mara, still capable of mounting a horse faster than men half her age, looked at it with exaggerated suspicion. "What are you buying this time?" "Nothing," he said. "I thought I might ask whether you are still choosing where you stand." She placed her weathered palm in his. "Beside you," she said, "as long as you remember that beside does not mean behind." Nathaniel smiled. "You have spent 25 years making the distinction impossible to forget." Together they walked home to Reed Crossing, the ranch he had once been willing to lose for her freedom, and the home she had freely chosen to help him keep. If you had been Mara, would Nathaniel's willingness to lose the ranch have been enough to prove that his proposal came from love rather than necessity? And in the next story, a widowed horse breeder offers shelter to a wounded stranger during a blizzard, only to discover the brand beneath his torn coat belongs to the family trying to steal her land.